Well, howdy, folks. I got a bunch more stories to tell just about my Western life in general. I got away with stuff that you'd be locked up for now, and I know a lot of people aren't interested in it, but I want to preserve it for posterity's sake, and my grandkids will enjoy it someday. So these are just personal adventures I had. And one of them is back in the early 70s, I left Colorado as a kid and moved up to Montana. I worked for a couple years on a power line, and you work 14, 15-hour days, 7 days a week, and when you finally finish or just had enough, you take some time off. So I went up to Bozeman, chasing college girls, if I remember right, and I was looking for a place to rent. And I asked a realtor, and she just laughed at me. She said, "That's a college town. There's nothing for rent here." She says, "But my grandpa died a few years ago and left me a section of ground, that's 640 acres, up in the mountains with an old log cabin, and I'd lease that out." So I went and looked at it, and it was amazing. Trout stream in the front yard. It sat about a quarter mile off a county road. Moose and bear and elk in the backyard. It was an original country store, post office, and saloon. And there was a whole mining town there, and the Japanese came in the 30s, and they bought up all the steel, all the iron tracks out of the coke mines, the locomotives, steam engines. Everything was leveled but this beautiful 3-story log place. So I leased it for next to nothing per year. And I was running 20 head of horses there in the summertime. And, well, I was the only one that lived on that road in the winter. And it was 20 miles either way to Bozeman or Livingston, and they didn't maintain the road. So it was called, now they call it off-grid living. We didn't call it that cool term back in the day. It was just living in the bush. And I loved it. So I'm up there one winter, probably 4 or 5 foot of snow. And like I say, the only time that road opened, if the loggers were in there, they'd bring their own equipment, plow the road, and do their work. And, you know, I had long curly hair in those days. Of course, I wasn't putting Arctic Platinum number 9 in it. I had brown hair back then. And I was probably the only guy in that part of Montana with long hair and living off the grid and was making good money. And, you know, all them ranchers and stuff, they hadn't seen this before. I think they all thought I was crazy. Normally, someone looked like me in those days would get their butt handed to them by a bunch of cowboys and take a pair of sheep shears to them, but I was just crazy enough that nobody bothered me. But when I went to town, I always wanted to be clean, even though I was off-grid, no running water, electricity, hot water, none of that stuff. But I'd always make sure I was shampooed and cleaned and shaved and stuff. And so one night I got the fire going, and I had these giant, probably 1-gallon old tea kettles, and I'd get them both boiling hot water, empty half of one into a wash basin, put cold water in there to wash and shampoo, and then fill that half-empty kettle back up with cold water for a rinse. So I get all lathered up and got my hair all soaked, and I reached out and I grabbed the boiling hot kettle by mistake. Started dumping on the back of my head, and of course, as soon as I realized, I went to throw it, and the lid come off and just burnt the whole back of my head, neck, and shoulders. And I stood there in disbelief for about 10 seconds, and then that pain just started building, every heartbeat. And I've lived through some bad wrecks. I'd broken 50 bones before I was 45 years old, but this was the worst ever. And I'd dunk my head in a bucket of cold water, and I'd get relief for, 30 seconds, and then each heartbeat, here come that pain again. And I don't know how long that lasted, and I remember standing in the living room of this off-the-grid cabin. I'm screaming, looking up at the Lord, and I must have passed out. And I don't know how long I laid there, but I woke up in the morning, and the whole back of my head and neck had blistered, and of course the blister had broken, and all my hair's matted with that goo, and I'm frozen to the carpet. And I'm weak, and why I didn't freeze to death, I don't know. I must have laid there for 12, 15 hours. So I'm reaching back, and I'm trying to pull my hair loose, and it's glued to that carpet, either frozen or dried. And, well, I start yanking the hair out of my scalp, and I finally get ripped loose and crawl up the stairs and get in bed, and I'm sure I'm going to die. Nobody's using that road. Well, about a day or two later, and I don't know how long I laid there like that, there was an old family of loggers up there, 2 older men and their young sons, very religious, very old school, and I'd tried to visit with them half a dozen times, but I didn't think much of a long-haired cowboy living off the grid with new pickups and horse trailers and everything else, and they just didn't like me. But they noticed after 2 days of logging in there, no tracks, no smoke coming out of the chimneys, and you had to walk a quarter mile off the road through the creek bottom up to the house. And one of them come in there and he found me. I'm out cold, and they wrapped me up in a tarp and make a sling and drug me down that snow to the creek and up to the road and got me to the hospital. And I woke up in the hospital with this little Korean doctor that sewed me up I don't know how many times over the years. But they truly saved my life. But just kind of a story about how romantic living off the grid and all that stuff can be. You make one tiny mistake and you're toast.